Story 1. My first real skiing trip happened with my friends Emma, Sarah, and Michelle. The four of us flew out to Colorado, where we rented an Airbnb in Snowmass, a little town near Aspen Mountain Ski Resort. At that point, I had only been snowboarding once before in my life, and that experience was just me tumbling down the bunny hill repeatedly. To put it simply, I was terrible. Straight from the airport, we took an Uber to our rental house, which turned out to be a spacious 4-bedroom home with a massive deck. The highlight was a hot tub that overlooked the breathtaking Colorado countryside. By the time we got there, it was already dark, so we decided to head out to a nearby bar to kick off our trip. It was Thursday night, and the place had a cozy, laid-back vibe. The next morning, we Ubered to the ski resort to rent equipment and hit the slopes. Since it was a weekday, the mountain was not too crowded. The first day was all right, though my snowboarding skills, or lack thereof, quickly became apparent. I could not make it down a single run without falling multiple times. Frustrated, I eventually parked myself on the side of the slope to catch my breath, watching little kids zoom by effortlessly. I envied how easy they made it look. That was when this guy, a fellow struggler on the slopes, came over and asked if I was okay. It was such an odd place to strike up a conversation. After a bit of polite small talk, I told him it was nice chatting, strapped my board back on, and attempted to make my way down again. This slope was a blue run, meaning it was a step up in difficulty but not extreme. After falling a few more times, I decided to take another breather. To my dismay, the same guy from before appeared again, sliding his way over to me. He stopped nearby, unstrapped his board, and started chatting again. He even made a comment about not being used to seeing pretty girls like me on the mountain, which was odd, considering I was bundled up in a helmet and ski mask. When he asked who I was with, I lied and said I was here with my boyfriend. He chuckled and pointed out that he saw me arrive with my group of friends. Creeped out, I loudly said, "Ew," before getting back on my board and heading down as fast as I could. Surprisingly, I managed to snowboard better in that moment, maybe fueled by adrenaline or sheer determination to get away. When I reached the bottom, I went straight to the lodge and called Emma. She answered right away, and I explained what had happened. I asked her to come sit with me, and within minutes, she arrived. I had already texted the group chat, suggesting we leave soon, since it was around 3 p.m. anyway. Once Sarah and Michelle finished their run, they met us at the lodge. We returned our gear and Ubered back to the Airbnb. That evening, we got ready, headed into the village for dinner, and ended up at a few bars afterward. We had a great time and returned to the house tipsy and in high spirits. We hopped into the hot tub on the deck, drank a little more, and laughed until we decided to call it a night. As someone who struggles with insomnia, I stayed up scrolling through TikTok on my phone for over an hour. Even though I was still buzzed, I could not fall asleep. Looking back, that might have saved us. I heard faint footsteps in the common area, maybe the living room or kitchen. At first, I assumed one of my friends was up getting water or using the bathroom. But then, I noticed the doorknob to my room twisting. I froze. Why would one of them try to come into my room? I texted the group chat to ask who it was, but no one responded. Quietly, I crept to the door and listened. I could hear faint footsteps moving around. Gathering my courage, I gently unlocked the door and peeked into the living room. My heart sank when I saw a tall figure, just a silhouette in the dim light, moving between doors. He was trying to get into one of the other bedrooms. Terrified, I shut my door and locked it. I whispered a prayer that my friends had locked their doors too. I called 911 as quietly as I could and whispered into the phone, explaining the situation. That was when I heard soft knocking on my door. The doorknob rattled again as the man tried to open it. I was panicking, begging the dispatcher to send help quickly. Suddenly, the knocking turned into loud bangs. I could not hold back any longer. I screamed, "Get out of here! I am on the phone with 911. The banging stopped, and I heard the man say, "Okay, sweetheart," before his footsteps retreated. The operator told me to stay in the room until the police arrived. I peeked out the window but could not see much in the darkness. My friends, now awake from my screams, texted back, confirming they were safe. Minutes later, the police arrived and cleared the house. The intruder was gone, but the experience had shaken us all. We secured every door and window before trying to sleep, though none of us got much rest. The next day, we wondered if the man from the slopes had followed me. His voice matched the intruder's, and the coincidence was too eerie to ignore. After arranging a partial refund with the Airbnb host, we decided to explore the area instead of skiing again. We spent the last night at a nearby motel and flew home Sunday morning. Story 2. When I was a kid, my dad had this saying, "Do not be afraid of ghosts, fear the living. They are the ones who can hurt you." Those words stayed with me, though I never really understood them until much later in life. After my dad passed away, he took his own life. I inherited some money from him. It was a tough time, and I needed to clear my head. At the time of his passing, my parents owned a cabin up in Oregon, near Mount Bachelor. It was a peaceful spot, surrounded by towering trees and fresh mountain air. But after my dad was gone, my mom could not keep up with the payments. She had already started the process of selling it. The cabin was going to be listed in about a month, and it was no longer being rented out. For that short window, the place would sit vacant. I saw it as an opportunity to escape. So, I quit my job, packed my snowboard, stocked up on food and supplies, grabbed my dog, Shadow, and drove my dad's old car up to the cabin. The first couple of days were quiet, almost therapeutic. Shadow and I played in the snow during the day. At night, I would snowboard, play video games, or sit on the balcony with a drink, staring up at the stars. It was just what I needed, a chance to reset. The cabin itself was simple but cozy, 2 stories with a living room, kitchen, and a guest bedroom downstairs. Upstairs, there were 2 more bedrooms, including the master, which had a balcony. I spent most of my time in the living room or the master bedroom. I kept the other rooms closed off, figuring there was no need to wander into them. On the 3rd day, things started to feel off. That afternoon, while Shadow and I were outside, I noticed footprints in the snow around the cabin. They were fresh, maybe from the last 20 or 30 minutes. At first, I thought someone might have been staying in one of the other cabins nearby, but I knew they were all empty. The footprints led away from the cabin, disappearing into the dense forest. I shrugged it off and went back inside. Night came, and I headed to bed. Shadow was curled up next to me when his ears suddenly perked up. He jumped off the bed and bolted downstairs. I lay there, listening to him move around the living room, pacing back and forth. After a few minutes, he ran back upstairs and started doing his little dance, his signal that he needed to go outside. I sighed. "Fine," I muttered, grabbing his leash. But when we got outside, Shadow did not do his usual business. Instead, he started pulling on the leash, dragging me toward the trees. He sniffed the side of the house, looking up at the roof, and then sat down, staring into the darkness. Something about it gave me chills. I pulled him back inside and locked the door. Later that night, as I lay in bed, I heard what sounded like footsteps on the roof. At first, I tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a pine cone falling, or an animal scampering across. But the steps were too deliberate, spaced apart like a person walking. Shadow heard it too. He ran to the balcony door, barking and scratching to be let out. Trying to muster some courage, I grabbed my flashlight, a coat, and my cigarettes. I stepped onto the balcony, lit up, and scanned the roof with the beam of my flashlight. Nothing. The snow was untouched. I tried to relax, leaning against the railing and staring at the stars. That was when I saw it. In a tree about 20 feet away, perched between 2 branches, was something. At first, I thought it was a person, but it was too tall, at least 8 or 9 feet. Its limbs were impossibly long and thin, and its pale, almost white skin stood out against the dark tree bark. It crouched there, holding onto a higher branch with its elongated arms. Its mouth was open wide, expressionless and eerie. I froze, unable to look away. Shadow stood behind me, pacing and growling low in his throat. The thing did not move. My gut screamed at me not to shine my flashlight on it. Slowly, I backed into the cabin, pulling Shadow with me. Once inside, I locked the door and drew the curtains. But the night was not over. Hours later, I heard tapping at the balcony door. It was faint, but consistent, like someone gently tapping their fingers on the glass. Shadow stared at the door, but refused to go near it. I felt this overwhelming pull to open it, like someone, or something, was inviting me. But in the back of my mind, I heard my dad's voice, "Do not do it. Stay in bed." I listened to that voice. Eventually, I fell asleep. When morning came, I wasted no time packing up. Shadow and I were back in the car and on the road within an hour. I did not look back. Story 3. My family owns a property up in Vermont that we usually visit in the winter for skiing and snowboarding. It sits at the top of a hill, surrounded by thick woods. The nearest neighbors live further up the road, but their houses are so far apart that you cannot see them from our place. Outside the house, there is a big shed where we store snowboarding gear, lawn tools, and other equipment. We keep it locked when we are not there, but during our stays, we leave it unlocked for convenience. We never really worry about theft while we are there. The house itself is a cozy, 3-story cabin. The third floor is a loft-style master bedroom reserved for my parents, and the rule is that my siblings and I are not allowed to use it. One weekend, I decided to head up to the cabin with a friend, Melissa. She had never snowboarded before, so I was going to teach her. We had a beginner board stored in the shed, along with all the other gear she needed. Our property has a steep hill that we use as a private slope for snowboarding or sledding, so I figured it would be the perfect place to teach Melissa the basics before heading to the mountain. We geared up and walked to the top of the hill. I started with a slow descent, demonstrating the basic movements. When Melissa gave it a try, she fell immediately, which was expected. But she was determined, getting back up after every fall and improving with each run. We would ride down to the bottom, then walk back up to start again. While we were mid-session, we both heard a man's voice call out, "Hello." It sounded like it came from the woods. We stopped, looking around, but all we could see were trees and a blanket of snow. Despite the stark white surroundings, we saw no one. I called back, "Is someone there?" But there was no response, just the unsettling quiet of the forest. Melissa and I exchanged uneasy glances and decided to head back to the house. I told her it was probably some hiker passing through. It did not make sense for it to be the neighbors because their driveways were unshoveled, and they would have no reason to wander into our property like that. I tried to dismiss it, but the strange encounter lingered in the back of my mind. Later, we went to a nearby diner for lunch and picked up some groceries. By the time we got back, it was dark, so we decided to spend the evening at the house. After dinner, we lit a fire in the outdoor fire pit and relaxed. That was when we heard it again. The unmistakable crunch of footsteps in the snow, not far from where we were sitting. I turned off the music and listened carefully, but the crackling fire made it hard to hear anything else. I grabbed both our phones, using their flashlights to scan the woods. "Is someone there?" I called out again. Melissa grabbed my arm, urging me to go back inside. I did not argue. We locked the doors and stayed inside for the rest of the night. The next morning, I woke up to find Melissa already out of bed. Still groggy, I figured she was outside. When I got up and looked out the window, I saw the shed door wide open. To my shock, I noticed a puff of breath, as if someone was standing just inside the shed. I assumed it was Melissa and yelled her name out the window. Her response came from inside the house, startling me. She was in the living room, not outside. My heart started racing as I watched the breath, clear evidence that someone was out there. I shouted, "Yo, who was in my shed?" Then I slammed the window shut and ran to the living room. Melissa stood there, confused and alarmed. We both looked out just in time to see a figure in black running into the woods. I threw on my boots, but by the time I got outside, it was too late to follow. I checked the shed, but nothing appeared stolen. Footprints in the snow showed someone had come from the woods, entered the shed, and then fled back into the forest. Though I was uneasy, we tried to put the incident behind us. After breakfast, we headed to the mountain for a day of snowboarding. Melissa did great, picking it up faster than I expected. We had planned another day on the slopes, but decided to play it by ear after everything that had happened. That night, we stayed inside, cooked a steak dinner, and watched a movie. Around midnight, I woke up to Melissa shaking me. "Listen," she whispered, her voice trembling. We sat in silence, and then I heard it, a long, drawn-out cry for help coming from outside. "Help me," it called, chilling and deliberate. Melissa was in near tears, begging me not to investigate. I promised her I would not go outside, but I could not resist peeking out the curtain. All I saw was darkness. I cracked the window open slightly, and a rush of cold air hit me. That was when I heard footsteps in the snow, getting louder and closer. Panicked, I slammed the window shut and locked it. Moments later, a knock came at the window, sending shivers down my spine. Melissa hid under the blanket, quietly sobbing. I told her to stay put and not make a sound. Whoever it was did not knock again or call out anymore, but I stayed awake, my ears tuned to every noise. The next morning, I found footprints circling the house, stopping at every window. It was clear we were being stalked. We packed up immediately, locked everything, and left for Rhode Island. Nothing was broken into or stolen, but the whole experience left us shaken. To this day, I cannot explain what that person, or those people, wanted, but I know for sure they had been watching us since we arrived.